It's a pleasure to be in front of all of you here today, and I'm really humbled to have this opportunity to speak with you. Let's see, there we go. This is one of Dr. King has many incredible quotes. This is one of the quotes that has resonated with me growing up in Iran and then immigrating to the United States in the late 70s. He talks about injustice. And why is that so important to us? Because justice is part of the core of each and every one of us in this world. Whether you're born in Fresno, California, or in Somalia, or the Middle East, or Israel, or Europe, or South Africa, or South America. Justice is part of our core. The need for justice, the need for equality. And why is that? Because God instilled those in us. We're all children of the same God. And then God gave us the blueprint to be happy. And that blueprint comes in many forms. But three of the most popular copies of that blueprint are what? The Bible, the Quran, and the Torah. God gave us the operating manual to keep us happy. We just need to, if we just listened to those words, read those words, we would lead and live a life that's substantially happier. And it comes back to this. Dr. King was talking about justice. That's why his message resonated with everybody across this world. As an Iranian in Iran, I heard his message. This is not a Fresno thing, it's not a California thing, it's not an American thing. It's a global message. And he talks about injustice. He talked about injustice, which comes as a result of oppression, as a result of misinformation, as a result of inequality across the world. And we have many examples of that. And I'm going to just bear with me for the next 15 to 20 minutes. I'm going to go through a lot of these examples. He also talks about not being silent. I don't know if you can see this. Maybe if we just dim some of the lights or shut down some of the front lights if possible, so that people can see the images on the screen. He talks about not being silent, which is just as important. We have to educate and inform ourselves, and then we cannot be silent about injustice. He died because of his message. He died because he was driving this message, and he was not going to be silent anymore. This is another one of my very famous quotes. The purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference so that we have lived and lived well. Now, just again, bear with me for a few minutes. How many of you remember this image from last summer? Who is this? Cecil, right? An injustice took place. Somebody actually killed a lion, a very famous lion in Africa. But at the same time that this injustice took place, which we all heard about, all over Facebook, all over the media, a 2-year-old Palestinian boy was burnt alive in Palestine. Because of atrocities, and I'm not going to get into political issues between Israel and Palestine and the occupation of the Palestinian properties, but a 2-year-old boy was burnt alive. How many of you saw this image? Very few. And that's an injustice. All lives matter. Many of us have seen this image. This is a Syrian refugee that died on his way to better opportunities in Turkey and parts of Europe. That's an injustice that is taking place in the world. Unfortunately, some people in government, some candidates for office, and many of us are afraid of the refugees, of the Syrian refugees, of the Iraqi refugees. And today there's not enough time to discuss why we have so many refugees in this world. But I can tell you this, there's 4 million Iraqi refugees, and they just didn't happen to become refugees overnight. Many of you, all of us, have remember the 2003 war in Iraq, which displaced millions of Iraqis. These are people like us. They're farmers. They used to be cops, business people, elected officials, bus drivers, government workers, politicians, attorneys, home builders that were displaced overnight because of this war. That cost us, the hard-working taxpayers of this country, over $1 trillion, and has displaced 4 million Iraqi refugees. And now we have 7.5 million displaced Syrians. We're not going to talk about that today, but it's important to put this in context. Another injustice, 9/11. It's an incredible injustice that occurred in our country in 2001. But how many of you know there were candlelight vigils in Tehran, Iran, within a few days after 9/11? In downtown Tehran, Iranians en masse came out and held a candlelight vigil. How many of you heard that? That's an injustice. Now, I'm going to get to another graph here in a minute. Whether we like, agree, or disagree with Donald Trump, his message is very popular in this country, especially amongst Republican primary voters. Is it okay to talk about politics for a few minutes? Nathan, yes?
Go for it.
Okay. Why is his message so popular today? Because so many people in our country are mad. They're frustrated. Middle-class America hasn't seen real wage increases, hasn't seen prosperity over a decade or more. If you look at real wage expansion in our country over the last decade or decade and a half, it's been very anemic. We elect people, we send them to Washington, we send them to Sacramento, we send them to our own backyards, into City Hall. Some people make campaign promises. They try to deliver, but they get into the system and they realize it's difficult to honor all the commitments we made. Not to take anything away from our elected officials, it's a difficult job. I happen to know many of our elected officials in this room, and each and every one of you work very hard to try to make this a better place to live, work, and play. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this is the approval rating of Congress. I think the numbers are between 9 and 15%. People are mad. Our purchasing power keeps on shrinking. So Mr. Trump's solution is we have to deal with China, put tariffs up on China, deport 12 million undocumented workers, and we're going to blame Islam on the violence and insecurity in this world, especially in our own country. And that's an injustice in my mind, because there's a lot of misinformation. I'll give you an example. Let's start with China. How many follow the stock market here? Okay, a few of us, probably all of us, get impacted by the stock market at one point or another. Our stock market is down 10% in the last few months, by and large because there is concerns that China is going to slow down its economic growth. It used to be 10.5% a few years ago. It's currently at about 7%. And there's fears that China's growth is going to go down to 6.5% economic growth. U.S.'s growth, in contrast, is about 2.5% to 3%. The target is 3.5%. If you get 3.5% GDP growth, gross domestic product growth, year after year, we're doing really well in the United States. China's growth is, we're afraid that it's going to go from 7.5% to 6.5%. The result of that is a 10% drop in the U.S. stock market portfolio valuation. And now we want to put tariffs on China. That's, I think, what Mr. Trump is advocating. We're going to put tariffs on Chinese goods, which means what? If that shirt that we're going to buy at that store, or that shoe we're going to buy for our kids, are going to cost 20 to 30 to 40% more. Someone's going to pay for those tariffs. Which means that middle-class America, the part of our country that's most impacted and most furious, they're going to even be, their dollars are going to even stretch substantially less buying power by their dollars. So talking about putting tariffs and closing down our borders and deporting people is very dangerous. U.S.-Mexican border and deporting of 12 million undocumented. Who picks our fruits, our vegetables? Who hammers the nails to put a lot of buildings up? Who is in our service industry doing the jobs that so many of us and our kids don't want to do? Today it happens to be the undocumented workers. Now, imagine what would happen if we deported 12 million people out of this country. What would happen to simply the price of tomatoes, the price of your head of lettuce, the price of a construction activity, a home, an office. So these are easy solutions for the mind to think of, because the mind wants the simplest answer to complex problems. We all have difficulties in our own daily lives. There's issues, challenges, but how do we deal with our economic malaise? The answer from some of the candidates for office is shut down, deport 12 million people, and put up tariffs against China. Well, I can tell you, I think that would be a disaster in our country. And I'm so glad, and I don't agree with everything our president says or does, but I'm so glad we have somebody in the Oval Office that understands these issues and understands the difference between making news and rhetoric and getting things done. And finally, Mr. Trump's attack on Islam, which is, I believe, and I want to spend a few minutes on Islam. How much time do I have left? 1 more minute? No, can I get 10? How many more minutes? 5 to 10? 5-ish? I'm sorry? Okay. Well, we're going to be here till noon then.
Never say that to Darius. 5. Okay, 10.
Just cut me off when you're getting bored with this information. Is this too much information so far? Okay. The attack on Islam, and that is very dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, because you cannot kill a religion. You cannot kill an ideology. Dr. King was killed, but his ideology will live forever. You cannot kill justice. And now, allow me for a few minutes to talk about Islam, jihadi terrorism. This is one of the famous quotes from Thomas Jefferson that talks about the separation of religion and state. And that's why these United States are an incredible haven and a place for so many immigrants from all over the world to assimilate. And separation of religion and state is one of the key components that makes this country so great. So, let me talk for a minute about KKK. We don't confuse Christianity with KKK. In the same fashion that we should not connect radical jihadists with Islam. How many have heard of Wahhabism? Okay. When I asked this question of my friends and other colleagues, nobody, even people in the media, very few people have heard of Wahhabism. Wahhabism is a cult that was born in Saudi Arabia in the 18th century. It's by Mr. Wahhab. Very backward, restrictive, oppressive interpretation of Islam. They have written their own books. They believe in purging of all non-Wahhabis. I'm a Muslim immigrant, and I'm an infidel according to Wahhabis. Purging of all non-Wahhabis, which means Jews, Christians, other Muslims across the world. Now, why is that important? First of all, none of you have, well, very few of you have heard of Wahhabism. That's why it's important. Also, if I told you that Osama bin Laden was inspired by Wahhabism, the couple in San Bernardino a few months ago that committed those atrocities, most of you know that they went to Saudi Arabia for several weeks or several months. They get indoctrinated and come back. 15 out of the 18 hijackers of 9/11 were Saudi nationals indoctrinated in Wahhabism. By the way, what did our government do in reaction to that? A swift reaction to appease the masses. We banned Iranian students coming to the United States. And today, because of all the atrocities that took place in San Bernardino and Paris, we passed House Resolution 158, which restricts travel by dual nationalities of Iranian descent. Wahhabism, which is born out of Saudi Arabia, considered by many to be our strongest ally in the Middle East, we don't talk about. We don't talk about Saudi Arabia and the connection between Wahhabism and a lot of the atrocities that are taking place in this world. And that's an injustice. So, I'm going to talk for just a minute about ISIS. ISIS ideology is inspired by Wahhabis and Wahhabism. And the dismantling of the Iraqi government and the military, which overnight in 2003, over 1.5 million Iraqi soldiers and strategists and government employees and generals and cops were fired by our government. After the invasion of Iraq, we sent a special envoy to that country, and we dismantled the entire regime. Now, removal of Saddam Hussein was a blessing. He was a thug, killing many of his own people. When the Kurds in 1991 helped the CIA against Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War, when we pulled out of Iraq, Saddam Hussein gassed an entire Kurdish village in northern Iraq, killing 47,000 of his own people. Now, there's two injustices in that. One, obvious, that Saddam killed 47,000 of his own people, but as importantly, the people that helped the CIA in that first Gulf War, when we pulled out, we just left them naked and gave Saddam an opportunity to go out and kill 47,000 people. By the way, those of you that watched 60 Minutes a few years ago, we did the same thing in Iraq in the second war. Many Iraqis that helped U.S. forces by gathering data, gathering intelligence, snitching on other Iraqis that were, creating or behaving badly against our forces. These Iraqis that were helping us wanted refuge. We turned our back to them. How many Iraqis were allowed to come to the United States during the Iraq War? I think the number is under 800. Thousands, tens and thousands became cab drivers, informants for U.S. Special Forces and U.S. intelligence and U.S. Armed Forces. And when they were being identified by the bad folks, by the ISIS folks, by Al-Qaeda, they became targeted. We just turned our back to them. Those of you that want more information on that, please take a look at the 60 Minutes article from or broadcast. I believe it was 3 or 4 years ago. Let me fast forward. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't get it. So ISIS is a direct outgrowth of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. This came out of Richard. How many have heard of Richard Clark? Almost all of us. And those of you that don't get a chance, the best, by the way, program that I find useful is on Sunday mornings of Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Global Public Square. It's at 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. It's an incredible broadcast on a lot of the injustices that take place in our world. Okay, let me fast forward now. Solutions. Where do we go from here? First of all, we should embrace. I'm going to go in reverse order. How do we deal with jihadi terrorism, at least on our own soil? We should embrace the Muslim community. And I'm proud of Chief Dyer, who's here with us today, who has sat on 2 panels that several of us came together and put together with Imam Ghazvini's leadership on ISIS versus Islam, so that we don't paint or brush all Muslims with the same broad brush. The same way that the FBI treated the Italian-American community in the 1920s to identify who the members of the mafia are, the FBI realized quickly that how do we identify the mob? When all Italian-Americans were being labeled as criminal, then nobody wants to snitch on their fellow countrymen, immigrant from Italy. So FBI realized quickly we need to not paint all Italian Americans with the same brush. So that in the same fashion we should embrace the Muslim community, connect and communicate and have better relations with the mosques, and let the Muslim community in this country identify the radicalized within them. I can tell you it's much faster for Imam Ghazvini and other Muslims. We'll find out much sooner somebody that's beginning to become...
Excuse me, I'm Elizabeth Anderson, I'm a Unitarian minister, and I came to honor Martin Luther King today. And I believe in equality. I did not come to listen to your political rhetoric. I think it's inappropriate.
I apologize, ma'am, if I've offended you, but I believe this message is the message of Martin Luther King. This message if Dr. King was here today, he would be ashamed of what's happening in our country, of the injustices that are occurring. Thank you. So, it's much easier for Muslims to identify the radicalized. And I believe our law enforcement that we've worked with closely, that have a close relationship with through the Islamic Center, at least in Fresno, understand it. And I believe Clovis would have similar approaches. But this is the fastest way to identify radicalized Muslims. So when we come out and say Muslims should be deported, or Muslims should not be allowed into this country, what does that do? It galvanizes the entire Islamic community here. 3.5 million of us in the United States. And that's not what we want to do. That's playing into the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So again, the message for our government leaders and for our media, please, I'm begging you, do not paint all Muslims with the same brush. We're just playing into the hands of the evil called ISIS. Thank you. For the undocumented, we should, as a Republican, I'm going to say this, we should create a path to legalization of all 12 million undocumented in this country. They're hard-working residents of our country. I know several who've been here over 2.5 decades. They pay their taxes, they do beautiful work. Without them, I mean, I can tell you this, the construction industry will probably collapse in Fresno and Clovis. And at the same time, we should enlarge immigrant quotas by whatever our needs are in our country. And I know that may not be very popular here, at least not today, but folks, we have 5% unemployment. Again, there's many people that are blaming our president for economic malaise. I'm trying to figure out how we have massive economic malaise. I understand middle class wages are not going up, but massive economic malaise doesn't equal 5% unemployment. Everybody, I think we all understand it in this room. The people that are saying we have lots of economic problems, the country is going down economically, well, we have 5% unemployment. A few years ago, we had 10% unemployment. So we're on the path to recovery. Would I have wanted a faster recovery? Yes. Would I wanted to have seen more job creation in this country and faster? Yes. But nonetheless, we have an incredible economic environment. We need to expand the legal immigration opportunities. So if we need more tech people in Silicon Valley, we can get them. If we need more dollars to come into this country, we should be able to attract those. Or we simply may need more labor. I think my time is almost up. Okay. Let me just fast forward. This is an Iranian, I'm not sure Iranian actually, it's a Middle Eastern woman that put a beautiful response to Donald Trump's recommendations about having ID cards for all Muslims in this world. She's on Facebook. Those of you that want to track her down, if you go to Granville Home's Facebook page, you'll see her commentary. This is an ad that the Islamic Cultural Center took out on ISIS and Islam. Many people say, you know, Muslims need to speak out more. Well, in the last 6 months, we've spoken out multiple times. And this is the challenge to media. Please show up at these events and broadcast them. We law enforcement, FBI and law enforcement and Sheriff Mims have been to these events, and they recognize and they speak publicly about Islam and terrorism, and that you can't paint all Muslims with the same brush. I wish the media would cover that more frequently. Many of you are famous with Ronald Reagan's farewell speech, where he talks about immigration and our shining city upon a hill, where if we have walls, the walls are open to all immigrants from all walks of life. And finally, where do you think this image is from?
Mendota.
This is a very sophisticated, educated crowd. This is not Syria. This is not Iraq. This is not a third world country. This is Fresno County, ladies and gentlemen. So we have issues in our own backyards. 20,000 farm workers have been unemployed and are living in these conditions because of the drought. And because half of our water today in the drought gets used for environmental uses in the state of California. 40% for food production, 10% for municipal use. So today, this is another injustice that's taking place in our own backyards. The lack of water to Central California, farmers are hurting, but more importantly, 20,000 farm workers are unemployed, which leads to what? Domestic violence, leads to unemployment, leads to divorce, leads to losing your home, leads to living in these conditions. So, in my final remarks, many of you have seen our company get involved in public policy. And occasionally, I get a call from somebody, or we get a message on Facebook that says, you know, stick to home building. But it's difficult for us to stick to just home building or farming. When we see injustice take place, it's difficult to sit on the sidelines. We left Iran in the 70s before the revolution took place. We were not economic refugees. We were not political asylum seekers in the United States. My family, my older brother, is actually the first person that immigrated directly to Fresno, California from Iran. We wanted to live in the land of opportunity. We wanted to live in the land of justice and equality, and where hard work and smart work resulted in good opportunities for us and our families. That's why we immigrated to the United States. And that's why it's difficult for us to sit on the sidelines and see bad public policy take shape. That's why we're involved in public policy. For the first few decades, we just minded our business, built homes, farmed. Then we realized some of the policy that comes down has many bad unintended consequences. They're really the acid test for our leadership in this community, our political leadership, and private sector leadership, is how are we addressing the ills of our community? Which is what? Public safety, prosperity, education. Those are the three issues. Draft, I think, was a hot issue, which hopefully we're getting over that. But these issues are constantly have plagued us in this community. So we need leadership. We want to encourage leadership that addresses the ills of our community. So we get involved, which means what? Occasionally we get shot at by friends and foe. So if you want to join us in this drive, support some of the causes that we're following, if you agree with them. And the simplest way would be email me directly. My email is on that screen. Go to our Granville Homes Facebook page. You see a lot of stuff we post, more than just homes, more than just farming. We talk about a lot of local policy issues that are taking shape currently in the city of Fresno. Get involved. Make your voices heard, please. Again, we believe that the best way to help our community is to have good public policy. Let me just end with these two quotes. This is one of my other favorite quotes, not by the person, but by what he said. The world suffers a lot, not because of the violence of bad people, but because of the silence of good people. So we do, as a family, as a company, we are not silent. Claudia Casares is here with us today, one of the kind of chief architects of our policy work. And I can tell you, she takes hits. We take hits. But we will not remain silent. We cannot sit silently on the sidelines and let injustice take place. Many people, many of my fellow developers tell me, why do you care? You know, you're doing good work, you can continue to do good work, you can navigate your way around bad policy. It actually makes it better for you because your competition that's not as familiar with dealing with these policy issues, they're going to get stymied. They're going to go to the wayside. That's the wrong long-term approach for this community. If we want to pull ourselves out of the lack of prosperity, the doldrums that we're in, we need to think differently. We have to speak up. All of us need to speak up. And in the words of Dr. King, if we are to live in a world filled with prosperity, opportunity, and hope, we cannot remain silent. We have to inform ourselves. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate people around us, and we should not remain silent. Because in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends that did not come to rescue us, did not come to help us when we were talking about justice. Thank you very much, and sorry I've gone over.